final presenter to close will be the Prime Minister, Minister of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin the closing remarks, I ask for your indulgence and the indulgence of members in offering a comment on the procedures of the House. The use of points of order. I believe Member Hilton on that side, let me survey, Member Hilton would agree, and the leader of opposition business, member from Kingston Eastern and Port Royal would agree that the use of the standing of the points of order would not be for trivial purposes or routine, that they were really used when a member felt that there was a contravention of the rules of the House, specifically the rules governing debates. We emerged a convention where members would rise to their feet and claim a point of information or a point of clarification. And the convention was that the member who had the floor would yield. And I recall those days quite clearly when members would stand and say, point of information, Madam Speaker, and the member opposite would yield. Or sometimes the member rising on a point would not even say what it is. He would just say, could you yield, member? And that was the convention. And forgive me, member from South St. Catherine would have been there as well. It has changed a bit. And we have sought to use the points of order where they really should not be used. And I would just want to encourage members for the good order of the House and its proceedings that we revert to the time-tested, tried and proven conventions that have served us well. Madam Speaker, let me start by thanking members on both sides of the House for participating robustly in the debate. Valuable points have been made. Points of substance have been made. And there are other points which I think are also of substance, even if a modicum, that you would have to search very hard to find. But they are there, I'm sure, nonetheless. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to thank all who participated and would have enriched the bill. I would want to adopt to, just as a matter of giving a summary of the debate in terms of the opposition's participation. The member from St. Catherine, is it Eastern? Believe it or not, Madam Speaker, well, you would know we attended the same alma mater. So, Madam Speaker, the point raised by the member was that the opposition supports the bill, we just don't support what is in it. I found it to be a very profound comment. We support the bill, but just not what is in the bill. So Madam Speaker, I find that to be a very profound summary of the opposition's position. You want a point of information? So, Madam Speaker, but I do understand what the member intended to say. That no one can say that NARA is not a necessary formation in law. No one can say that having a structure to manage recovery is not something that is defensible and necessary. So I think there is the starting point, that NARA is necessary. I think, however, Madam Speaker, that if I am permitted to offer some philosophical perspectives on the differences, that there is a very deep mistrust of government in the country, very deep. But underneath the mistrust of government generally, there is an even greater mistrust of executive power. That is really what it comes down to. A deep distrust of executive power. And by the way, this is not unique to Jamaica. It is a worldwide phenomenon for countries that have what is described as a liberal democracy. The democracy is liberal precisely because executive power is controlled and in many instances restrained. The challenge comes, Madam Speaker, when democracy cannot bring prosperity. That is where the challenge happens, because the assumption is that democracies will automatically bring prosperity to people. And that thinking is sometimes challenged in certain quarters. But I continue to maintain that democracy is the best form of government that we have. And that we must make our democracy work to deliver prosperity. The challenge is, how do we use executive authority without it trampling on the rights of the people? That is always the challenge. And that's why our system is designed as it is, where the members of parliament should come vigorously defending their positions to ensure that executive authority is restrained, but we have to be careful that executive authority is not constrained. Because it is in the constraining, the over-limiting of the actual power to execute that the prosperity is actually delivered. And I would say this, Madam Speaker, that I've been in this position of Prime Minister now for a decade, and it is a learning experience. I continue to appreciate the nuances of the office each day. And I will say to you that during the pandemic, the challenge of using executive authority was a real challenge for the administration. And indeed, we had to use executive authority as it relates to controlling movements and all kinds of other things that we had to do. And the former Attorney General at the time, member from Western St. James, West Central St. James, would have gone to great pains to advise and to say, we have executive authority, but we have to be so careful with it in how it is used. And I made sure that every executive direction that I gave, that I put my signature to, as I did it, I came to Parliament at the next sitting to bring the executive authority to Parliament for Parliament to have a say on it. And there were times when Parliament's say, though not by authority, couldn't change it. But because Parliament said you should consider this or you should consider that, we took that on and we made changes to many of the various orders for movement and gathering and all the other things that we had to do. That was, for me, at that time, the ultimate exercise of the executive authority. The lesson learned from it is that in a democracy, executive authority overused can be dangerous even for the person using it. No matter what, it leads to suspicion, frustration, and the view that you are restricting the freedoms of individuals at your own whim. And I would say that I suffered from that during the pandemic, even though in my mind I was acting to support and to promote the health and safety of the public. But there are many Jamaicans who felt that I restricted their movement. So I want to just use this as a basis to say, Madam Speaker, I am not seeking executive power for myself. It's dangerous. And executive power must be controlled, without question. I'm a firm believer in that. The question is, can we find a way to structure our business such that the use of the executive authority delivers the prosperity without taking away the freedoms, transparency, rights of the people? That's where it is at. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to thank JET, the Jamaica Environmental Trust, and Jamaican for Justice. They wrote letters to me. The letter from JET was quite extensive. They obviously put a lot of time in going through the bill. They did take the time. And I have to say this, Madam Speaker, because lots of times there are persons who will just hear what is said, look at the headlines, don't know any details, form an opinion, because there is always something called confirmation bias. Somebody who you like said something that you like, and therefore that's your position, without doing the research. It's obvious that these two groups did their research and they put forward their concerns. I will say, Madam Speaker, that not everything that is proposed can be legislated, and not everything that can be legislated should be legislated. And the persons who are drafters, persons who understand the law far better than I do, would agree with that point, that you want the legislation to, one, be consistent with legislation that already exists. You want it to be consistent with the Constitution, and you want your legislation not to be complicated. You can have complex legislation, but you want the legislation to be easily interpreted, well understood, and direct and to the point. And so we try to bring a legislation here that creates a framework that is easily understood, easily interpreted, and gets to the point of what it is we want to achieve. So that's one thing. I will say a few other things, Madam Speaker, if the members give me their attention a little longer. There is a point about bringing the bill to a joint select committee. Let me be clear. We on this side, we have taken a decision that as far as possible, we're bringing all our bills to a joint select committee. That's a decision that we took after the experience with the NIDS. Subject, of course, to emergency situations or great urgency. I have heard the undertaking that there would be a commitment on the side of the opposition to have the joint select committee turned around very quickly. And we accept the intention, but we know that it takes a little while. And on average, you're looking at 3 to 6 weeks at the minimum, and sometimes even longer. So I would say I'm being generous, I'm being euphemistic, but it takes a long time. So I would say, Madam Speaker, that I appreciate the opposition recognizing that the joint select committees are not the fastest mechanism, that they will try, but for this bill, urgency is important. And I start at this point about urgency. And I'm being very careful in the use of the term urgency, because I really should say it is an emergency. But I wish to point out to members who were in the House between 2009 and 2015 that this House, not under emergency powers, but under urgency, passed several important pieces of legislation that would oversee billions of dollars, including donor funds, without subjecting them to any committee review, any joint select committee review, including money bills, including the very fiscal rules, which are far more important than the Naira bill. There was not 1 ounce of criticism of that move. Not one. At that time, part of that time, I was leader of the opposition. And the members on my side will tell you that I gave directives. This is in the national interest. Participate. Make sure that our points are raised, but we are not going to stand in the way or try to make political points of something that is in the national interest. And I wish for that to be in the public record. The fiscal rules and all the others, some of the other money bills, all the other amendments that were made, went through without going to joint select committee. And not one journalist, not one of the commentators today said anything. So I just want that to be put in the public debate. So the other point, Madam Speaker, is that during this time of urgency, between 2009 and 2015, we had to, as a country, and I say we meaning government opposition, we had to mobilize the entire country for the reconstruction of our financial system. Essentially, that's what it was, our fiscal and financial system, the reconstruction of it. And what worked very well, particularly as it related to the managing the repayment of our debt with several debt exchanges, was the establishment of an oversight body of the government policy for fiscal and financial reconstruction. And that was called the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC. It was never legislated in the fiscal rules. It was not legislated in the PAAC oversight. It was not legislated in any of the omnibus tax legislation. It was a social consensus. And there is no more powerful tool for oversight than social consensus. And EPOC carried us through the economic reform program. It played a role in keeping the opposition then on side, keeping us informed, working with the Minister of Finance, making sure that what the government said it was going to do, it did. But the EPOC, which was comprised of Jamaicans of high integrity and public trust, reported periodically, regularly, to the country on the activities of this fiscal and financial reconstruction effort of the government. And it worked. It kept the government to its word. What it said it was going to legislate, it legislated. And it kept the opposition to its word. What we're going to support, we supported. And we can stand here today to say that Jamaica came out of that very difficult period with a reconstructed fiscal architecture and monetary architecture as well. something that we can be proud of. And we can do the same thing with the reconstruction of Jamaica after Hurricane Melissa. That is all that we're trying to do. Madam Speaker, permit me to return to this concept of the use of executive power, because it's fundamental to what we're doing here. Now, when we were contemplating how to structure NARA, a thought was put on the table. Why not make NARA a department of government? Now, if we made NARA a department of government, would there be a board? No. Would it be illegal to make NARA a department of government? Are departments of government legitimate structures of how government organizes itself? Of course. Of course. In other words, you know, it is not unusual. There's nothing wrong with that. The authority then would flow flows cabinet, minister, permanent secretary, ministry employment. But we know that departments are further decentralization of executive and civil service powers of an entire ministry. But you can decentralize even further by putting in an agency. And that agency could be a corporation, or it could be a statutory body, or it could be an executive agency. And I just want to pause at that point. For statutory bodies, the idea is that there is a function of government that is clearly well defined, that has an indefinite function in terms of time, that would require detailed operational guidance, which would not be suited for a department of a ministry to do, but would still require ministerial guidance. So a minister would give the general policy direction and say to an entity like the UDC, a statutory body, here is your authority. It's written in law what you are supposed to do. This statutory body will exist indefinitely. Go and redevelop areas for urban purposes. Go and acquire land for land banking for those purposes as well. Go and operate various companies to provide services. The minister can't go and run that day to day. Every day there is a different use of the executive authority, delegated through a board and an executive officer. So the board manages the governance of the general policy direction, but also in some instances guides the executive officer in the day-to-day management and helps to resolve conflicts, manages that. That's fine. But what about a function that is very specific? For example, giving passports to Jamaicans. It's an executive agency. That function is very specific. And I was doing some research, and former Prime Minister Pattison, obviously struggling with the same issues I have raised here about how do you get the democracy and its bureaucracy to deliver prosperity, how do you speed it up, came up with the then Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Davies, with the idea of an executive agency. Now, the concept behind the executive agency came out of what is called the school, it's a new school of public administration taught, the new school of public management, which essentially tried to turn the public service more into a corporate service delivery, to use private sector approaches in government. And so the idea was for these kinds of functions that are clearly defined, that may not necessarily require great discretion of the minister, the policy direction is very clear, that you could just create an agency whose only task is get it done. What policy direction should there be in fixing potholes, other than to fix the pothole? So the NWA was, and still is, an executive entity. It has a specific task, and you just want to get that done. And so I'm giving you the history of how it came about. So instead of having a statutory body or having a department of government like Public Works Department was, you formed an executive agency where the minister gives a directive, meaning the policy directive, and the executive is only executing. The Executive Agency Act provides for the executive to have an advisory board. How it works is that the executive recommends, the prime minister appoints, but it's not a governance board. It's not a governance board. And it advises the CEO. Now, what we did with NARA, we looked at it and we said the functions of NARA are going to be very specific. More than that, members, it is time bounded. So this is not going to go on indefinitely. And the policy direction for NARA will be very clear. They will be written and made public. But more than that, the scope of NARA, I heard somebody say NARA is not narrow. That's not true. NARA will be focused on a specific set of projects that will be published. The other issue that I would want to clarify that the use of this structure, NARA, focused in this way, does not take away from existing resources. And that was a prime consideration in the creation of NARA. The member from St. Catherine Eastern and the member from St. Mary Central raised the issue that what is going to happen is that NARA is going to suck up the approval resources, and a lady who wants to build her house and recover from the hurricane, her approval will be left behind. That is not true, member, and you should take great comfort that that is not so. And so the lady who is listening and feels that you are representing her should have great comfort that that is not the case. That NARA is designed to operate in parallel with, not in competition. And NARA is designed in such a way that the resources that it will have are going to be on top of what exists in the regular system. So it's not going to take away from the regular system. And just to be clear, when Hurricane Melissa hit, my direction was the half of Jamaica that was not hit needs to work twice as hard to make up for the part of Jamaica that was hit. And, it's clear that the productive elements in the country that were not impacted, they have put out the effort. And those who were impacted, they have also put out the effort. And what we are seeing is that the recovery is going to come much sooner than we had initially predicted. And so in no way would we structure NARA for it to take away from the regular resources that we are encouraging to work even harder. So NARA will not take away from the regular resources. No.
Sorry, Prime Minister. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, as we are clear, it has been a robust debate. And as the Prime Minister is closing, we ask that he be given an additional 15 minutes to complete the presentation.
Hold on, Prime Minister. The question is that the Prime Minister be allowed 15 minutes to complete his presentation. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mike, Prime Minister.
The other area of concern seems to be that it is the Prime Minister who appoints the CEO. So there are different methodologies of appointing CEOs, depending on the structure that is employed. It is not unusual for the appointment to be from the Prime Minister for certain entities. No, there are some entities that the Governor General appoints. But it's not unusual for the Prime Minister to, or the minister in charge of the industry, the ministry to appoint. I want to be clear that the post of CEO for NARA was internationally advertised. Internationally. We got several dozen applications, many of them from all over the world. We appointed a very high level interview panel, review committee. I don't have the members who are on it, but I know I should probably say it, just to be clear, the cabinet secretary, my recollection, the head of the Port Authority, Professor Gordon Shirley, who also is the chair of our Police Services Commission, the head of the Transformation Implementation Unit, the TIU, was also a member, and a few other persons. So there is no involvement of me directly or personally in vetting any CVs or shortlisting anyone. I want that to be publicly known. So there is a distance, a healthy distance between myself and the process of finding, interviewing. I also want to point out that there seems to be a concern about concentration. I've heard that centralization is a term used. That NARA seems to centralize power and authority in, sometimes the criticism is centralizes it in the CEO or centralizes it in the minister. In the executive model, it is a deliberate strategy. The whole idea was that the diffusion of the responsibility is what caused the lack of performance, because you can't point on anyone to say you are responsible. And so when Dr. Carlton Davies crafted it, he said, the rationale, he said that the primary, well, let me not say that, let me go ahead. The rationale was to ensure that responsibility is not diffused. That there is one focal point for which accountability can be effective. That was the idea. And I would want Jamaicans to appreciate that your government is very sensitive to any concentration, any centralization that may lead to unregulated unwield the executive power. That's not our intention. But at the same time, Jamaica is in a different phase of its development. And we can claim to be in a different phase of our development because we have gone through a phase of our development where we haven't really analyzed it yet. In the sense, Madam Speaker, that our accountability and oversight framework is probably the most robust in the Caribbean. We spend billions of dollars. When you look at, so if you look at our oversight capabilities and what we have built, we have let's start with the Auditor General. Enshrined in our Constitution, high functioning. Nothing is exempt. And the Auditor General has moved from doing post audits to doing real-time audits. They have moved from doing accounting audits to doing performance-based audits. We have the Integrity Commission. We have the Corruption Prevention Act, which defines in a very comprehensive way corruption and as an entity to prosecute it. Outside of that, we have MOCA, not a part of the IC framework, but acts in that way on specific major organized corruption activity. Then we have the PAAC. Bear in mind that the PAAC is maybe it's 20 years old now, about 20, maybe 20, yeah. I brought the resolution to this house to reinstate the PAAC. And it has been very effective and was reformed to be the oversight of Parliament of the economic program of the fiscal rules. Our budget now must go through the PAAC. There is no entity of government that can escape the oversight of the PAAC, and that body is chaired by the opposition and must continue to be chaired by the opposition. It is important that it is chaired by the opposition. So the oversight function of the government apparatus is significant. So when I spoke earlier about ensuring that legislation is efficient, you can't come back here now and then legislate a new framework separate and apart from the framework that is already legislated. We have a strong framework. Let the framework for oversight work. Every day, listen, the persons who are advocates for anti-corruption, they must continue to push. You can't ease up because you don't want government to become relaxed. But the Parliament has to be careful that it does not smother and suffocate the effectiveness of the public bureaucracy by an overlaying of procedures that have no relevance to outcomes. So we have gone through this phase in our development where we have been highly focused on anti-corruption. We must continue, but we are now going into a different phase where we have to ensure that our bureaucracy is efficient. It is not a wiping away or an undermining or a dismissing of the anti-corruption frameworks. No, it is. We will continue to push that and continue to spend the billions of dollars on it. But democracy must deliver prosperity. And I am not the only one speaking in frustration about the slow pace of the government. It is said on both sides. This is what we meant when we say we have to pivot. So I think I've captured most of the issues. And again, I want to thank all the members who have participated, who have contributed. It has enriched the bill. And it is my hope that on this matter, the public record would be that the Parliament, by acclamation, supported the bill rather than history records a divide on this momentous moment. Madam Speaker, I now ask for the second reading of the bill.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk?
Let me.
A bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Management and Implementation of the Post-Disaster Reconstruction and Resilience Efforts consequent on the passage of Hurricane Melissa, and for resilience, generally to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, and for connected matters read a second time.
Thank you. Marshall? The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause.